I always thought I knew exactly how I would start and end each of my days. I woke up early, passed my coffee, opened the living room window, and watched the movement of the street. That house was my world, the place where I raised my children, buried my husband, and kept my secrets. That morning, everything seemed the same. Even the sound of the kettle beeping seemed too ordinary. I had no idea that within minutes, someone would knock on my door to rip the ground off my feet. The first sign that something was wrong was the insistent doorbell. It wasn't a neighbor's touch asking for sugar or a boring salesman offering an internet plan. It was an impatient, calculated touch, as if whoever was outside was sure of what he wanted. I grabbed my cane, mumbled something about uneducated people, and went to the gate. When I opened it, I came across an impeccably groomed woman, leather briefcase in hand, and a cold look. "Donna Irene?" she asked, as if she needed to confirm what she already knew. I nodded slowly, suspiciously, as my eyes ran over the papers in his hands. She introduced herself as Dr. Valeria, a lawyer, and held out a brown envelope for Mim. At the same time, I felt a tightness in my chest, as if my body had understood before my mind. I invited her in, but the truth is that I already regretted it even before I opened the gate completely. We sat at the kitchen table, the smell of freshly brewed coffee contrasting with the coldness of that woman. She opened the briefcase, took out some documents, and pushed them towards me with rehearsed calmness. "I'm here on behalf of your daughter, Helena," she said, as if talking about any other person. My heart calmed down for a second, thinking it was just something bureaucratic. But her next sentence came as a stab. "You have 7 days to vacate this house." I laughed, first out of nervousness, then out of incredulity. I asked if that was some kind of bad joke, the kind that television records in secret. She kept a serious expression and just pointed to the paper. The house was registered in Helena's name. There, cold and impersonal, the document said that I was practically an intruder in my own life. My hands began to tremble, and for a moment I was afraid of falling right there in front of her. "That must be wrong. My daughter would never do that to me," I muttered, more to myself than to her. The lawyer crossed her hands and explained, with the patience of someone who has done that many times, that there was a power of attorney giving me full powers to Helena to resolve patrimonial matters on my behalf. According to her, I myself had signed that document years ago. I looked at the signature and for the first time in a long time doubted my own memory. While she talked about deadlines, notary's office, registration, I could only hear the echo of the word vacate. Vacate the house where I had pictures on the walls, height marks of my children on the doorframe. Vacate the backyard where my husband planted that mango tree that now shaded the laundry. It was as if someone asked me to rip off my skin and hand it over, folded in an envelope. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was hold on to the edge of the table so it wouldn't fall apart. I asked why Helena wasn't there with me, if it was so urgent to get me out of the house. Dr. Valeria replied that my daughter thought it best to avoid emotional embarrassment. He said that Helena was only claiming what was hers, within the law. At that moment I felt more cold than fear, as if the blood had suddenly decided to leave me. The distance between me and my daughter seemed to grow miles in a few seconds. When she finally got up to leave, she left the papers on the table as a sentence. She repeated the deadline, 7 days, and suggested that I look for my rights, although she was sure that nothing would change. I accompanied that woman to the gate with short steps, as if each one was the last in that land. As I closed the gate behind her, I realized that my legs were too weak to support me. Leaning on my cane, I looked at the facade of the house and, for the first time, I was afraid of losing it for real. I went back to the kitchen and stared at the papers as if they were a silent enemy. The lyrics seemed to dance in front of me, and my signature, or something like it, accused me. I didn't remember that day, that pen, that notary's office, anything, but the whole world seemed to believe that I was to blame for having given my house to my own daughter. It was then that a question began to hammer in my head. If I didn't do it, who did it in my place? If you are feeling Donna Irene's pain with this injustice right at the beginning, subscribe to the channel now to follow every twist and turn of this story. The first thing I did was pick up the phone from the living room with my hands still shaking. I dialed Helena's number almost automatically, as if looking for a miracle remedy. Each touch that fell without response felt like an extra push into the abyss I was falling into. When the call went to voicemail, I heard her voice recorded, cheerful and distant, wishing a good morning. It was ironic. Her recording was more affectionate with me than the attitude she had taken in real life. I insisted 2, 3, 4 more times until I lost count. I sent her short messages asking if she knew anything about the lawyer. I wrote that I needed to talk urgently, that they were trying to get me out of the house. The messages were delivered, but they stayed there, unanswered, as if I were talking to a wall. That silence hurt more than any harsh words she could have said. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the same one I rocked Helena in when she had a fever. I looked at an old photo of us, in which she smiled proudly, holding her college diploma. I remembered everything I did for her to study, the extra shifts, the savings counted coin by coin. It was hard to believe that this daughter, who had once slept clinging to my neck, now treated me like an enemy. The good memories struggled with the bad ones inside my head, and none really won. After some time, a notification from the cell phone vibrated in my hand. My heart raced, thinking it was Helena's answer, but it was just a propaganda message. I sighed deeply and felt an anger that I didn't remember feeling even when I fought with my husband in the past. How did she have the courage to just ignore me while someone else spoke for her? At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just the house I was losing, it was my position as a mother. I decided to call my eldest son, Augusto, even though I knew that he lived far away and hardly came to visit me. I explained everything at once, without breathing properly, mixing dates, names, and deadlines. He listened in silence, and when he spoke, his voice came tired, as if I were an old problem. He said he didn't know anything, that Helena hadn't talked about it with him. He promised to see what he could do, but I knew well that phrase that didn't mean much. After hanging up, the house felt bigger and emptier than ever. The clock on the wall made an annoying tick, marking a time that seemed to run against me. I went to the window and saw the neighbors talking on the sidewalk as usual. For a second, I thought about going out and venting to someone, but I stuck in the door. I didn't want to be the talk of the street before I even understood what was happening to me. I returned to the kitchen and opened the papers left by the lawyer again. Here was the story that someone wrote in my name, without my permission. That power of attorney had my name, my data, and a signature too similar to mine. The more I looked at it, the more I felt that there was something deeply wrong. A smell of old lies hung over those neatly arranged words. It was then that I remembered something that didn't match that whole story. Years ago, my husband had commented, half drunk, about putting everything on track at the registry office. At the time, I thought it was just tired man's talk, worried about inheritance and bureaucracy. Now those words came back like an uncomfortable echo in my mind. Had it all started long before I even realized it? Suddenly, I found myself getting up and going straight to the room where I kept my oldest things. I opened the wardrobe, pulled out the old and heavy leather suitcase that was hidden in the back. Inside, I knew there were documents, letters, photos, and memories that I avoided facing. I started to take it all out, spreading it on the floor, mixing dust with a silent desperation. I had a clear feeling that the answer to what was happening was not in the present, but in the past. As I went through that mess of papers, one thing in me changed. Fear began to give way to stubborn irritation, almost lucid anger. If my own daughter had the courage to try to get me out of my house, I wouldn't leave quietly. I might have been old, tired, and had pain in my knee, but I still knew very well how to fight. It was there, kneeling on the floor of the room, that I decided, if you want war, go meet the Irene that I myself had been forgetting. As I knelt before that old suitcase, I felt a shiver creep up my back, as if I were opening a door that had been locked for decades. The smell of aged paper filled the air, mixed with my husband's almost forgotten perfume, which seemed still impregnated there. My hands trembled, but it wasn't just from the physical effort. It was as if each leaf I pulled could dismantle everything I believed about my own life. With each memory that came up, something inside me said that I was closer to understanding what they were trying to hide. I rummaged through old letters, yellowed photos, and documents that I didn't even remember existed. Most had nothing to do with the house, but were like windows to a time when everything seemed simpler. However, at the bottom of the suitcase, I found a piece of fabric carefully rolled up, as if it were holding something precious. My heart raced before I even knew what it was. I unrolled the cloth slowly, praying that it would be the answer I needed. Finally, my eyes fell on a small, dark wood trunk, closed with a rusty latch. I held that trunk for a few seconds, feeling the weight of it, physical and emotional. I remembered that my husband always said that some things from the past should not be touched. At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration, but now the phrase sounded almost like a warning. I sat on the floor and pressed the latch until it gave way, creaking like someone waking up from a long sleep. The sound echoed in the room as if it were a warning. I took a deep breath before opening the lid, fearing that I would find something that would change my life forever. Inside the trunk was an organized pile of envelopes and accurately folded paper. At the top, a brown envelope with my name written by hand, in a handwriting that I would recognize anywhere. His. Even after so many years, seeing that handwriting left me breathless. I thought about closing the chest and forgetting that I had found it, but that would be the same as surrendering before fighting. I pulled the envelope gently, as if I was afraid of hurting the memory of the person who wrote it. I opened it slowly, feeling the rough paper under my fingers. Inside, I found receipts, copies of documents, and a letter with the name of the former owner of the house. That confused me because I was always told that the house had belonged to his family for generations. I began to distrust the stories I was told, questioning whether they ever revealed the full truth to me. With each page I turned, I noticed details that didn't match the version I knew. It was as if everything was built so that I would never question anything. The weight of the lie seemed greater than the weight of the paper he held. I continued reading and found, folded at the bottom of the envelope, a document that looked even older. The sheet was fragile, almost transparent in places, and had time marks on the edges. When I opened it carefully, I realized that I was in front of an old will, written decades before I even met my husband. The air came out of my lungs as if someone had punched me. That didn't make any sense. Why would my husband keep someone else's will? I read the names carefully, and the shock was immediate. The name of the true heir was not that of my husband. It wasn't mine. It was not from anyone I knew. It was as if the house had been taken in the past in as crooked a way as they were trying to do now with me. My whole body shivered, and for the first time I felt that my daughter was perhaps just one piece of a much bigger game. All that was far from coincidence. It was a repetition. I tried to absorb what I had read, but it was difficult to put the pieces together. If that document was legitimate, then someone, long before me, had been deceived. And now, decades later, someone was trying to repeat the story, only this time with me. A deep anger began to emerge within me, but also a new lucidity, a kind of courage that I didn't even know I still had. The truth was there, before my eyes, but there were still missing pieces to assemble the puzzle. I closed the trunk carefully, though my head was boiling with questions. I felt that I should talk to someone who knew the past of that house well, someone who witnessed things that I never knew. It was then that I thought of So Amaro, the neighbor who had lived there since before I moved. He always watched everything in silence, as if he had too many stories stored in his tired eyes. Maybe he had answers that I couldn't find on my own, and I was ready to ask. I stood up with effort, feeling the weight of discovery in every muscle of my body. The house seemed to look at me, as if it was waiting for my reaction, as if it understood that I had finally found the crack through which the truth could escape. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. I took the will, put it inside the suitcase, and got everything ready to go. If my own daughter had betrayed me, at least I could still trust my intuition. And she told me that the past was about to take its toll. I took the will in my hands again and watched it under the window light, trying to decipher every detail. The calligraphy was elegant, slanted, typical of another era. The name of the tester was totally foreign to me, but the address described was exactly mine. The feeling of living inside a story that I was never told was suffocating. I wondered how many people had lied to me, and why. At that moment I realized that I needed to understand everything before facing Helena. The document clearly stated that the house should have been inherited by someone named Samuel Abreu, a name I had never heard. The will was dated many years before I was born, and that only made it all the more intriguing. Why would my husband keep something like that? Did he know the illegality of what we had? Had the house never really been ours? The questions piled up in my mind like stones that I couldn't dodge. I felt a chill down my spine as I imagined that maybe Helena had figured all this out and was trying to get rid of me before I knew it too. A part of me didn't want to believe that, because I was still a mother, and a mother always thinks that there is some possible explanation, but another part, the one who had been hurt over and over again, was beginning to accept that perhaps Helena was more involved than I wanted to admit. Her silence only reinforced this distrust. I opened the letter that accompanied the will in the same handwriting as the previous owner. It was small, but it carried a huge weight. He said he trusted that the house would be in good hands as long as the document was respected. "The house belongs to those who honor their history," said an excerpt that gave me goosebumps. I looked around at my walls, my furniture, everything I had taken care of with so much affection. I never imagined that I was living inside something that rightfully belonged to someone else. I kept the will carefully and sat down at the table to organize the papers found. I realized that there were dates that coincided with strange moments in the past, such as the time when my husband disappeared for days, claiming to solve bureaucracies. Now everything seemed to make sense, or at least he was starting to do it. He knew something and never told me. Maybe I'd spent my life trying to hide a mistake, and now I was paying the price. I decided that I needed to confirm the authenticity of that document. I didn't know much about law, but I knew enough to realize that this role could change everything, including the farce that Helena was trying to put together. I grabbed my coat, put the documents in my bag, and took a deep breath. The feeling of being involved in something dangerous was strong, but I was already too involved to turn back. The house was not just a house, it was my whole life, and I wasn't going to give up. Before leaving, however, I felt the need to look again at Helena's photo on the shelf. Her expression in the image seemed more distant now, almost strange. For a moment, I wished that everything was just a misunderstanding, that she would knock on the door and say that she knew nothing. But the reality was harsh and cutting, and I could no longer pretend that my daughter was still that girl who sought shelter in my lap. She had abandoned me at the time I needed it most. I went to the door and froze for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision. If I went out to investigate, there would be no going back. I would be going headlong into a past full of cracks, secrets, and possible betrayals. However, standing still was even worse. The house seemed to watch everything silently, waiting for me to do what needed to be done. I took a deep breath and left, feeling the cold wind hit my face as a reminder that I was still alive and ready to fight. I walked to Seo Amaro's house, trusting my intuition. He had always been an observant and discreet man, someone who carried too many stories in his sunken, tired eyes. As I knocked on the gate, I heard his slow footsteps coming towards me. He looked at me as if he already knew that something was about to change. To my surprise, he just opened the gate and said, "I was waiting for you, Irene." It was time to face the past. When I entered Soamaro's house, I smelled old wood and mothballs, the kind of aroma that denounces decades of stored stories. He led me into the living room, where there was a worn armchair next to an open window. I sat down carefully, still holding the bag with the will, and noticed that my hands were shaking slightly. Amaro watched me with a look that mixed pity and understanding, as if recognizing a pain he has seen before. I knew he had a lot to say, and I needed to listen. He began by asking what the lawyer had said, and when I told him about the fake power of attorney and the eviction request, he sighed with deep regret. That gave me the uncomfortable feeling that he was already expecting something like this. When I mentioned the Old Testament, however, his eyes widened. For a moment, I thought he was going to deny everything, but instead, he got up slowly and closed the door to the room, as if he wanted to prevent the past from escaping. His attitude put me on alert. I knew this day was coming, he said, running his hand through his thin white beard. The phrase hit me like a blow. I asked him what exactly he knew, and he hesitated before answering. His heavy silence said much more than his words. Finally, he sat down in front of me and, in a low voice, began to tell me that, decades ago, he saw people coming in and out of the house during the early hours of the morning, on days when my husband said he was traveling. The heart beat fast inside my chest. As he spoke, I felt like I was being pulled into a story I didn't know was mine. He described backyard discussions, documents being exchanged, and mysterious visits. He said that at the time, he tried to warn my husband that there were people watching the house, but he was ignored. "This house has always been a reason for fighting," he said. His words echoed deep in me. If it was true, then my whole life had been built on secrets I was never told. I showed him the will, and Mr. Amaro watched him carefully, as if analyzing every detail. He recognized the name of Samuel Abreu, and said that he was a man who lived there a long time ago, someone who disappeared without a trace. He also said that after his disappearance, my husband appeared with new documents, declaring himself the rightful owner. Amaro did not accuse directly, but his pauses, his sighs, and the way he averted his eyes suggested much more than he said. A lump formed in my throat. With each word he said, my belief in my husband's honesty broke a little more. It was painful to admit, but everything pointed to the possibility that he had taken the house irregularly in the past. And now, ironically, someone was trying to do the same to me. I was silent for a few moments, trying to process everything. The room seemed to revolve around me, and the weight of truth crushed me. My chest hurt, not only for the discovery, but for the humiliation of realizing that I was wrong. Mr. Amaro then told me that years ago he saw Helena talking to someone on the street, a strange man who seemed to know details about our family. He said he found it suspicious, but that at the time he didn't want to interfere. It was information that left me astonished. Was Helena being guided by someone? Or worse, did she know about the house's dirty past and decided to take advantage of it? Doubt hurt as much as suspicion. For a moment, I felt like getting up and leaving, pretending that none of this was happening. But when I looked at the will in my hands, I understood that I had no choice. The truth was there, and I needed to face it. I asked Amaro if he could testify if I needed to. He looked at me as someone carrying an old burden, but finally said yes. I think it's past time to fix what was done, he murmured. That rekindled something inside me. When I said goodbye to him, I felt as if I had taken a veil off my eyes. The pain of discovery still burned, but now I also felt a kind of strength I didn't remember having. The house wasn't just a piece of ground, it was a tarnished history that finally called for repair. And if my daughter was involved in this, I was going to find out. I walked back home with firm steps, knowing that my fight was just beginning. As I re-entered my home, I felt the weight of secrets hanging on the walls, like invisible paintings. But for the first time in days, I felt no fear. I felt determination, and one certainty. I would go to the end, whatever the cost. The next day, I woke up with a strange sensation, as if the air was heavier. I had barely had my coffee when I heard the doorbell ring again. This time, it wasn't an insistent knock. It was a cold, calculated touch that made my shoulders stiffen. When I opened the gate, I found Dr. Valeria again, with a hard expression and an impatient countenance. It looked even sharper than on the first visit, like a blade about to cut through whatever was in its way. She entered without waiting for an invitation, as if the house was already hers. He sat down at the table and took new papers from the folder, scattering them as if showing marked cards in a dishonest game. He explained that Helena was worried about my emotional state and that immediate withdrawal would be the best for all parties. Her audacity made me shudder inside. It was cruel to realize that my own daughter was using my age as a weapon against me. I needed to take a deep breath so I wouldn't lose control. As she spoke in a rehearsed and impersonal tone, I noticed something different: the haste. She wanted to get me out of there quickly, almost desperate to sort it all out before anything came to light. Perhaps Helena was afraid that I would discover more than I should. Maybe they already knew that I was going through the old papers. It was a strange feeling, as if they were fighting against time, against the time it took for me to discover the whole truth. The lawyer began to list legal consequences if I refused to leave: fine, judicial intervention, even the possibility of declaring incapacity. When I heard this word, I felt my blood boil. Unable. Was that their strategy? Paint me as a confused old woman to justify the forgery? My stomach turned. It was revolting to realize that they were trying to turn me into someone I wasn't, using precisely my fragility as a weapon. But I was no longer alone in ignorance. When she mentioned that I could seek help from family members, I felt the teasing clear. It was as if I remembered that not even my children were by my side. I felt like screaming, but I kept calm and said that I was reviewing documents and that I would not make any decision without first consulting everything. The change in her expression was instantaneous. Her eyes narrowed, and she pressed her lips together, as if she had detected something she didn't like. It was obvious. She realized that I knew more than before. He tried to pressure me again, questioning what these documents were. I replied that it was my business. The tension between us became so heavy that it seemed to fill the air in the kitchen. She then put the papers away with a dry motion and said she would be back soon to check my progress. The tone of disguised threat was evident. Before leaving, she turned to me and for the first time spoke without masks. "You are wasting time, Mrs. Irene. The things you think you know don't change anything." That phrase kept hammering in my head even after she crossed the gate. My heart was pounding, but not of fear, of indignation. If she was so worried about what I might find out, then it meant I was on the right track. Her arrogance only served to make me more sure that there was something bigger hidden in the papers I found. And that, in some way, gave me strength. They were afraid, and their fear was the fuel of my courage. I went back to the living room and sat down slowly, taking a deep breath. The house seemed to watch everything silently, as if witnessing every bit of this war that was brewing. I looked at Helena's photo on the wall and felt a mixture of sadness and anger. It was still hard to accept that my daughter chose such dark paths, but now I knew I couldn't protect her anymore. I could protect myself. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since it all began, I felt a knife of determination cut through the fear that was left in me. I had documents, I had allies, and above all, I had the truth knocking on the door. Dr. Valeria could threaten as much as she wanted, but I wasn't going to surrender. My war was just beginning, and I was ready for every battle. If this situation is outraging you as much as me, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Here you can follow exciting stories of overcoming turning points and a lot of justice. The rest of the day dragged on, as if time was mocking me. I walked around the house trying to organize my thoughts, but every corner reminded me of something that now seemed suspicious. With each memory of my husband, I felt a tightness in my chest, not of nostalgia, but of doubt. I decided that before I could go ahead with any legal move, I needed someone who could guide me spiritually. It was not just a question of justice. It was a matter of the soul. It was then that I remembered Father Otasilio. He was a calm man, soft-spoken, and always attentive eyes. When I arrived at the church, the hollow sound of my footsteps echoed through the nearly empty hall. I found him arranging candles at the altar, and he greeted me with a tired but sincere smile. I sat with him in the front seat, where I had so often asked for strength to continue in difficult moments. But that day was different. I wasn't there to ask for comfort. I was there to ask for the truth. I told everything from the beginning, from the lawyer's visit to the will found. He listened to me with a patience that seemed endless, only shaking his head from time to time. But when I mentioned the name that appeared in the will, Samuel Abreu, his face turned pale. I realized it right away. He knew more than he was willing to say. My heart beat faster, trying to guess what that silence meant. When I asked him directly what he knew, the priest looked away, something rare for someone always so firm. He said he couldn't reveal certain things because of the confession, but that there were people who carried old guilt. This only increased my anguish. I pulled out the will from the bag and placed it on the bench between us. His reaction was immediate. He touched the papers carefully, as if he were facing something sacred or dangerous. His voice trembled as he revealed that Samuel was a man who had attended church for decades, someone plagued by family issues and a dispute involving the very home. He said that he even sought spiritual help at the time he wrote the will, fearing that he could be deceived by people close to him. What the priest did not say, but made clear between the pauses, was that someone had taken his house improperly, and that my husband, in some way, was connected to it. I felt my stomach turn. The image I had of my husband began to unravel like an old photo letting the ink run off. I asked if the priest knew who had helped my husband at that time, and he hesitated once again. He said that an influential man in the region was involved, someone who handled documents and transactions. It was something too vague, but enough to raise an alert. Someone powerful had an interest in that house, and perhaps still did. Before leaving, I asked the priest if he thought I should give up. He placed his hand on mine and said with unexpected firmness that God does not support injustices, neither those of the past nor those of the present. That gave me a silent strength. I felt that even without being able to say everything, he was on my side, and I needed every possible ally. The feeling of finally touching the heart of truth made my body tremble slightly. When I walked back home, I saw the street with different eyes. The shadows seemed denser, and the eyes of the neighbors more curious. The feeling of being watched accompanied me to the door. Still, the courage that began to sprout within me was greater than the fear. I knew I was approaching something big, maybe bigger than I could imagine, and somehow it strengthened me. When I arrived, I left the will on the table and looked at it as if facing an old enemy. Now I had clues. I had fragments of the past and people who confirmed, even if indirectly, that I wasn't crazy. Everything was about to fall into place. And if Helena thought she could easily destroy me, she was about to discover that I still had much more strength than she looked. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when I woke up with the feeling that I needed to act. I spent almost the entire night rummaging through memories, connecting Amaro's phrases, the priest's expressions and details of the documents. The truth was there, fragmented, waiting for me to put it all together. I sat down at the kitchen table, with the open will before me, and I felt a new determination pulsing through my veins. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about cleaning up a mess that had crossed generations. I decided to look for someone who could guide me legally. My money was little, but I still had dignity and the courage to knock on the doors I had previously avoided. I remembered an old acquaintance of the family, Dr. Alvaro, a retired lawyer who had helped my husband years ago. I never knew for sure what, because my husband kept changing the subject. Now it made perfect sense to look for the very one he didn't want me to look for. I put the documents in my bag and walked to his house. which was 3 blocks away. The gate was closed, but the lit porch light indicated that he was still awake. I clapped my hands and waited. When the door opened, he looked at me with surprise, but also with some respect. I invited myself in, and he listened to every word as I explained what was happening. The more I spoke, the more he furrowed his brows, as if recognizing a familiar and dangerous pattern. When I showed him the will, his look changed completely. He stood up, walked across the room, and ran his hand through his white hair, as if struggling with old memories. He said that he knew the name of Samuel Abreu, and that there were rumors that his disappearance was never clarified. He also said that at the time there were rumors that documents had been tampered with, but no one had the courage to report it because the man involved was too influential. That same man whom the priest mentioned now had a name. But Alvaro did not want to say his name immediately. Before, he asked if I was willing to face a war. His voice was not dramatic, it was realistic. He explained that tinkering with this past could awaken people who did not want to be remembered. I almost gave up right there, but when I thought of Helena trying to kick me out, I felt a force rise inside me like fire. I told him I had no choice. That was my home and my life. Realizing my determination, he finally revealed the name, Orlando Falcão, a man who, decades ago, ruled the neighborhood. He was known for falsifying documents and for solving inheritance problems in an unhonest way. He had helped my husband keep the house, and now he was apparently involved again, this time influencing Helena. I felt a chill run down my spine when I heard the name. That explained a lot. Alvaro was willing to help me. He said that despite being retired, he still had enough contacts, knowledge, and courage to face this battle. He analyzed the power of attorney presented by the lawyer and confirmed what I already suspected. It was false. The stamps were too recent, and the signature was probably made by someone trained. I didn't know whether to feel anger, relief, or fear. Maybe a little bit of everything. But for the first time since the beginning of this storm, I had a strong ally. I left his house with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The street looked the same, but I was different. Each step seemed firmer, more conscious. The pieces were finally moving, and not just against me. Now I was in the game too. The sense of vulnerability still existed, but it was accompanied by a new courage that I no longer remembered having. I was no longer being dragged into the situation. I was reacting. When I got home, I sat on the couch and let the silence take over for a few moments. For the first time, I felt I had a real chance to win. And if Helena thought I was going to accept this blow quietly, she was about to meet a version of me that even I didn't know still existed. The war had begun, and I didn't intend to back down. I returned to Seu Amaro's house the next day, with my heart racing and an urgency that I could not name. He received me with the same heavy look as always, as someone who carries a story too big for his own body. I sat down in the straw chair on the porch, and before he even spoke, he seemed to understand the reason for my visit. I showed him the papers again, especially the name of Orlando Falcão. The way his eyes darkened confirmed what I feared. He took a deep breath, as if drawing courage from the depths of his soul, and began to talk about a past that no one else commented on. He said that Orlando was a dangerous man, involved in forgery, bribery, and shady deals. He commented that he and my husband met in secret, always at night, as if they feared being seen discussing documents. As he spoke, I felt my vision blur for a moment. It was hard to believe that the man I had slept with for so many years was involved with people like that. I asked if my husband was directly connected to the outlet of the old house, and Amaro's expression answered before the words. He confirmed that my husband showed up with new papers shortly after Orlando's visits, and that he once overheard a loud argument between the two of them about an inconvenient heir. My stomach turned when I realized that the heir could only be Samuel Abreu. The story of his disappearance gained an unbearable weight inside me. I felt betrayed by someone who was no longer alive to defend himself. The memory of my husband, which I carried with so much affection, cracked like thin glass under pressure. I asked Amaro if he thought my husband had really robbed the house. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He only stated that, at that time, right and wrong were too easily mixed. His words were like a silent slap in my face. It hurt to admit it, but I needed the truth. When I mentioned Helena, his face changed again. He said that in recent months, he saw my daughter talking to a man who reminds a lot of Orlando Falcone. Only older, worn out, but still with the same arrogant attitude. The revelation made my heart beat like a drum. So there was this. Helena was being influenced by someone with an old and very specific interest in that house. It wasn't just her ambition, it was manipulation. At that moment, everything made sense. Her silence, the lawyer's haste, the desperate attempt to kick me out before I found out anything. They wanted to erase traces of an old crime that now threatened to resurface. My body trembled, but not from fear. It was pure indignation. I, who have always been underestimated, was seeing the entire board for the first time, and that scared them. I thanked Amaro, although the words came out heavy. He held my hands and said he would testify if he had to, because he was tired of carrying that secret alone. His kindness made something tighten inside me, something I didn't expect to feel, a thread of hope. For a moment, I realized that someone was finally on my side in this war that seemed impossible to win. I was not as alone as Helena intended me to be. When I returned home, my legs were firm, as if the ground had gained new texture under my feet. I sat in the kitchen, spread all the documents on the table, and let the pieces fit together in the silence. The story that was brewing there was dirtier than I imagined, and I knew I would face not only my daughter, but decades of lies. Even so, the courage inside me grew like fire. I decided, right then and there, that I would not be silent. Not because of me, but because someone needed to end that cycle of injustice that has been passed down from generation to generation. And I would be that person, even if my hands trembled, even if my soul hurt. The past was coming back to charge, and I was ready to open the door. When I closed my eyes that night, I felt fear, sadness, and anger. But most of all, I felt strength. The strength of those who finally understand that it is never too late to do justice. The next day, just after lunch, I heard the familiar noise of the gate opening with force. My heart locked in my chest before I even turned to look. Helena entered the room like a storm, with a heavy face and the hard look of someone who came to war. For a second, my mother's instinct wanted to embrace her, but the cold glow in her eyes killed any impulse. She was not there as a daughter. He was there as an enemy. "So that's it, Mom. Now you walk down the street saying I'm a thief?" she snapped, without giving me time to breathe. I tried to stand firm, but she came forward with sharp words, accusing me of spreading lies, of wanting to destroy her, of not accepting aging. I was silent for a few seconds, allowing the poison to drip out. When I finally spoke, my voice came out firm, almost serene. I asked her if she really believed that I would not discover the forgery. Her reaction was a shock to me. Her eyes widened for a second before she masked her expression again. It was quick, but enough for me to see. She knew. He knew about the forgery. He knew about the lie. He knew what he was doing. That hurt more than anything that had happened so far. The unspoken confirmation that my daughter, the one with whom I shared life, pains and dreams, chose to consciously betray me. I tried to ask who was influencing her, but Helena exploded like a pressure cooker about to break. She said that I never understood anything, that I was always weak, that my husband cheated on me all my life, and that now I was paying the price. Every word was a stab. The mention of my husband took my breath away. She knew about the house's dirty past. She knew, and yet she chose to use it against me. When I mentioned Orlando Falcone, she turned pale. It was subtle, but sufficient. My voice trembled when I asked how long they had been talking. Helena did not answer. Instead, he pointed to the documents on the table and said, "It doesn't change anything. The house is mine now. And if you continue to provoke, I make a point of proving to the justice system that you are not well in your head." That was the final blow. My own daughter wanted to declare me incapable. My whole body trembled, but not from fear, from indignation. I stood up slowly, leaning on the table, and looked right into her eyes. I told her that she could try whatever she wanted, but that I had proof, witnesses, and finally courage. Helena laughed, a dry, bitter laugh that I have never heard before. It was as if I was looking at a stranger. She said I was wasting time, that no one would believe me. But there was something in her voice that denounced the opposite, insecurity. Before leaving, she walked over and whispered something that chilled my spine. "You have no idea who you're messing with." And then he left, slamming the door hard enough to make the wall shake. I stood in the room, trying to control my breathing, while my heart beat wildly. Her threat wasn't just emotional, it was real, and it came from someone who was clearly being manipulated. When I finally managed to sit up, I felt the tears burn my eyes, but I refused to shed them. She wanted to see me weak. He wanted me to doubt myself, but he wouldn't be able to. No more. The pain I felt now fueled something more powerful within me, a deep desire for justice, not only for me, but for the past they tried to bury. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I took a deep breath, dried my eyes tightly, and looked at the will on the table. The house might be full of secrets, but I was ready to face each one. Helena could try to knock me down, but now she knew. I wasn't as easy to destroy as she thought, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. That gave me strength. War was declared, and I was prepared to fight to the last breath. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the documents as if they could answer me. My heart still ached because of the confrontation with Helena, but something inside me had changed. I was no longer running from the truth. I was going to meet her. It was then that I heard 3 firm knocks on the door, not strong, not aggressive, but sure. I got up cautiously, feeling a twinge in my knee, and went to answer. When I opened the door, I found a tall, thin man with grey hair and piercing eyes. He looked tired, but not weak. He watched me for a few seconds, as if confirming that I was who he expected. Before I asked anything, he said my name in a hoarse voice. "Donna Irene, I need to talk to you." I recognized him right away, not by his face, but by the name he himself said next. Samuel Abreu. My world stopped. The blood seemed to disappear from my body. He was alive, the missing heir presumed dead, forgotten by history. It was there, in front of me. I invited him to enter with trembling hands, still trying to understand what this apparition meant. He entered slowly, as if stepping into a territory that once belonged to him. And, in a way, it really did. I felt a lump in my throat when I realized that the house reacted to his presence. It was as if the silence changed texture. We sat in the room, and he began to count. He said that decades ago he was forcibly removed from the house by Orlando Falcão after refusing to sell the property for a ridiculous price. He said that he was threatened with death and that, fearing for his own life, he fled the city without looking back. He never denounced it because he knew that no one would have the courage to face Orlando. As I spoke, I realized that his voice carried an old tiredness, a mark of someone who carries a story that is too heavy. When I mentioned the will, his eyes lit up with something between relief and repentance. He explained that he left the document with a friend, asking that it be kept in case something happened to him. This friend, according to him, was Father Otacilio himself. I felt a shiver. It made sense. That's why the priest recognized the name. That's why his expression changed when I showed him the document. He kept that secret out of respect, out of fear or promise, maybe by the 3 of them. Samuel looked at me seriously and said that he had returned because he had learned from an acquaintance that the history of the house was repeating itself. When I asked who had told him this, he hesitated for a moment. Then I said the name that made my heart race. Alvaro, the retired lawyer. They had met again by chance weeks earlier, and Alvaro said that he had heard rumors about my situation. This is what brought Samuel back, not for material possessions, but to prevent a new crime from happening. I told him about Helena, the false power of attorney, Orlando, and the attempt to expel me. His face hardened, he closed his hands, and I could see the old pain he still carried. I said that Orlando never acted alone, and that it was likely that he was manipulating my daughter in the same way he manipulated my husband in the past. Hearing him say that was devastating. It was as if I confirmed, once and for all, that my entire life had been built on a lie that was now exploding in my face. Samuel then opened the bag he was carrying and pulled out a thin briefcase full of old documents, photos, receipts, and, most notably, letters written by Orlando himself, letters that could prove years of fraud, coercion, and threats. When he put everything on my desk, I felt like I was facing a bomb about to explode. If that were brought to justice, not only would I be acquitted, but the entire farce built for decades would be crumbled. We spent hours reviewing each paper, exchanging stories, connecting memories. For the first time, I felt accompanied, protected, seen. Samuel seemed to carry the same desire to repair the past that I carried now. When he finally got up to leave, he said something I'll never forget. "You're not just fighting for your house, it's fighting for my life too." That took me with emotion. I closed the door after he left and leaned my forehead against the wood, taking a deep breath. The house looked different that night. It was no longer a place of pain and uncertainty. It was a battlefield where I finally had allies. And for the first time since the beginning of this storm, I felt that I could win not only for myself, but for everyone who was hurt by that story. I had the truth, and now I had witnesses. The war was about to turn sides. The next day, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just strength, it was purpose. I prepared a strong coffee, as if preparing for a long trip, and spread all the documents on the table again. The house was silent, but I felt a different pulse, as if she herself was waiting for the next step. I picked up the briefcase carefully and went out to meet Alvaro, knowing that that day would mark the beginning of the most difficult part of my fight. He received me with the usual seriousness, but when he saw Samuel sitting in the waiting room, his eyes shone with surprise and relief. The two greeted each other with respect, like men who carry the same ghost from the past. Alvaro led us to his makeshift office and spent the entire morning reviewing each document. He analyzed everything with a precise eye, scoring important points, gathering evidence, and calculating strategies. He seemed, for a moment, the great lawyer he once was. When he finished the first analysis, he said something that made me feel a mixture of fear and hope. "Donna Irene, this is enough to bring down the whole farce." My heart pounded, because for the first time, it wasn't someone trying to console me. It was an experienced professional saying that I had real chances. I asked him what we should do, and he calmly replied that he would file an urgent petition to halt the eviction. It was the first step, and perhaps the most important. As he prepared the documents, Samuel recounted additional details of the persecution he had suffered in the past. Their stories were chilling. Threats, blackmail, sleepless nights, friends who disappeared. With each sentence, Orlando's image as a powerful and cruel shadow became clearer. But something caught my attention. Samuel was afraid, but he also had conviction. He no longer ran away. He wanted to face it head-on, by my side. Alvaro then explained to us what the hearing would be like. I said that Helena and her lawyer would probably try to demoralize me, to argue that I was confused, sick, or influenceable. Even knowing this, I felt a heat of indignation rise through my body. I wasn't confused. I was finally lucid, and I would make a point of showing that. Alvaro asked me to prepare myself emotionally, as it would be a tough confrontation. I just nodded. He was already living hard days. One more wouldn't kill me. We stopped for lunch in silence, but it wasn't a bad silence. It was the silence of someone who is about to face something big, When we finished, Alvaro asked to see the will again and placed it next to the forged power of attorney. Then he pointed to the differences, stamps, signatures, incoherent dates. I was struck by the clarity with which he dismantled point by point the lie constructed against me. It was like watching a curtain being ripped from a dirty window. Before we left, he asked a question that took me by surprise. "Are you prepared to see your daughter in court?" I felt a twinge in my chest. As much as I was angry, sad, and disappointed, she was still my daughter. To say that I was ready would be a lie. But I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm prepared to defend my life." He nodded, understanding more than I was saying. We returned to my house together, and when I entered, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't lost. I had allies, evidence, and above all, truth. I spent the night mentally reviewing every detail, but when I went to bed, Samuel sent me a short message. "Tomorrow, we will begin to repair the past." I smiled for the first time in many days. I lay on the bed, closed my eyes, and let fatigue embrace me. The battle was far from over, but I had already gone halfway there. And deep in my chest, for the first time, I felt something like hope. Tomorrow, the court. Tomorrow, the truth. The day of the hearing arrived with a weight that seemed to rest entirely on my shoulders. I woke up before sunrise, unable to sleep. The silence of the house, which had always been my companion, now seemed to watch me. I chose my outfit carefully, nothing extravagant, nothing attention-grabbing. I wanted the truth to speak for me, not the appearance. As I closed the buttons of my blouse, my hands trembled, but not from fear, from determination. When Samuel and Alvaro arrived to pick me up, I felt an inexplicable relief. She was not alone. We walked together to the car, and the drive to the courthouse seemed like an eternity. From the outside, the gray building looked like a cold fortress. Inside, I felt my heart racing when I saw Helena talking to the lawyer. Her expression when she saw me was a mixture of contempt and restlessness, but there was something different in his eyes, fear, a disguised but visible fear. We entered the courtroom, and the judge was already waiting for us. The environment was small, with white walls and a coldness that seemed to cross the body. I sat next to Alvaro while Helena and Valeria positioned themselves on the other side. The judge opened the session in a firm voice, and Helena's lawyer immediately began to speak. With the usual arrogance, he said that I was confused, that I made up stories, that I needed care, not conflicts. It was a perfect staging of someone who tries to turn the tables by manipulating emotions. When she presented the forged power of attorney, my stomach churned. Seeing my name used against me was like getting slapped. But Alvaro stood up calmly and asked to analyze the document before the judge. He pointed out every detail, the incompatible date, the suspicious signature, the stamp too modern for the mentioned period. Her tone was assured, firm, so solid that the lawyer herself began to lose her rhythm. For the first time, I saw Valeria restless. The judge then asked me to speak. I took a deep breath, felt my hands sweat, but I stood up with more force than I imagined I had. I told him about the lawyer's first visit, about the trunk, the old will, the discoveries of Amaro and the priest. I told him about my daughter trying to convince me that I was incapable. My voice trembled at times, but not from weakness, from emotion. When I finished, the room was silent. Even Helena seemed unresponsive, but the decisive moment was yet to come. Alvaro asked for permission to call an additional, newly available witness. Helena's lawyer protested, but the judge allowed it. The door of the room opened, and Samuel entered. The impact was immediate. Helena turned pale. Valeria completely lost her posture. The referee raised his eyebrows, intrigued, and I felt a lump in my throat. This man carried decades of injustice on his shoulders. Samuel told his story with the calm of someone who got tired of running away. He revealed Orlando Falcone's threats, the pressure to sell the house, the forced disappearance. He showed the letters that Orlando sent, incontrovertible evidence of coercion. He explained why he disappeared and why he has returned now, to prevent someone else, me, from falling victim to the same cycle. The room was so quiet that you could hear the creaking of the chairs when someone moved. When he finished, Alvaro put on the table the will, the letters, and the records that linked the crimes of the past to the current manipulations. The final piece of the puzzle was there. Helena's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge no longer seemed interested in the flimsy excuses she invented. The weight of the truth was too immense to ignore. I allowed myself to look at Helena at that moment. She looked smaller, shrunken, without the arrogance of before. His eyes avoided mine. There was anger, yes, but also guilt, maybe even shame. My daughter, for the first time, seemed to realize the monstrosity of what she had done, or at least the seriousness of the person she was getting involved with. When the judge announced that the power of attorney was invalid, that the process was fraudulent, and that the house would remain legally in my name until the full investigation, I felt something inside me unravel. It wasn't just relief, it was liberation. Decades of lies had finally been shattered. As I left the room, my legs trembled, but my heart was steady. The war was not yet over, but the truth had finally won the first battle. News of the decision spread faster than I expected. When I returned home, some neighbors watched me through the window, whispering to each other. This time, however, I felt no shame. I felt dignity. For the first time, I was seen not as a frail old woman, but as someone who fought and won. The house seemed to welcome me with a different warmth, as if recognizing that I was finally regaining what had always been mine. A few hours later, Helena appeared. He didn't knock on the gate. He didn't ask to come in. She just stood on the sidewalk, staring at me with a mixture of resentment and confusion. I approached slowly, feeling my heart tighten. I expected an apology, or at least a sincere look, but that is not what happened. In a dry voice, she asked how I had the courage to expose family matters in front of everyone. That sentence hurt more than any other, not because of the words, but because of what they revealed. She still didn't understand, or I didn't want to understand. I replied that family affairs should not involve forgery, threats, or attempts to steal one's own mother. His face hardened. She tried to blame me, said that I left her aside, that I always preferred Augusto, that I never valued her efforts. It was like listening to a lost child trying to justify something unforgivable. I realized then that Helena was not ready to take responsibility. She was stuck with old grudges that I never knew existed or that I never wanted to see. That hurt deeply. But I was no longer the woman who despaired. I was the woman who had faced the truth. I told her calmly that she could choose to move away for good or to start rebuilding something between us, even if little by little. She remained silent for long seconds. Then, without saying anything, he turned his back and left. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the possible ending. The next day, I received a visit from a bailiff bringing the documents that initiated the investigation against Helena and Orlando Falcão. Knowing that the law would finally act against those who caused so much suffering brought a sense of justice that I never thought I would feel. Even the lawyer, Valeria, would be investigated for complicity. It was as if a huge wall was finally collapsing. Samuel came to visit me later. He walked through the house with slow steps, touching the walls, as if rediscovering a piece of himself. He said he didn't want anything from me, not the house, not repair. He just wanted to see the truth restored. And above all, thank you for not giving up. We sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, and I felt that I had found a friend, someone who, like me, had been hurt by the same past. At night, as I lay in bed, I felt the weight of everything I had experienced in the last few days. The house was silent, but it was a different silence. It was peace. It doesn't complete, because nothing can erase a betrayal of her daughter. But it was a piece of those who fought, fell, and got up stronger. I knew that the next few days would still bring challenges, but now I would face them with my head held high. I had the truth. I had my house. And most of all, I had myself back. The next morning, I woke up with a strange, almost uncomfortable serenity. It was as if my body finally understood that the storm had passed, but my soul was still trying to believe it. I opened the living room window and let the fresh air in. For the first time in a long time, I felt that the house breathed along with me. She seemed lighter, as if the walls had shaken off the weight of the lies they had carried for so many years. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe not. While preparing coffee, I noticed that my movements were different. I no longer trembled when I touched things. I didn't feel that anguished urgency that accompanied me in the last few days. But there was something new, a sense of painful maturity, like an emotional scar that still burned but reminded me of strength I didn't even know I possessed. I sat down at the table and looked at the will, now tucked away in a folder next to the stove. He no longer brought me despair, he brought clarity. In the middle of the morning, Augusto called me. His voice sounded strained, perhaps embarrassed that he had not been present. He said he found out about everything and apologized. Not a complete excuse, not one of those coming from the bottom of my soul, but enough for me to understand that he finally recognized the gravity of everything that happened. I didn't feel angry with him. Just a slight sadness, as if accepting that some relationships are what they are, with their flaws and limits. Sometimes that needs to be enough. Shortly after, Helena appeared again. This time, he knocked on the gate. Her face was haggard, and her swollen eyes indicated that she had cried. When I opened the gate, she took a deep breath, as if she was gathering her courage. But the request for forgiveness that I expected did not come. Instead, she asked if I was happy to have won. That cut my chest, but not in the old way. Now I could see the pain behind the words. Still, I replied firmly, that wasn't a victory. It was survival. Her silence lasted for long seconds. She looked at the house, at me, at the floor, as if she were trying to gather inside her a truth she didn't want to admit. Finally, he said he needed time, and I agreed. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't try to hug her. I didn't force anything. Sometimes loving also means letting the other go until they find their own way. Helena left through the empty street, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of losing her. I felt only hope that one day she would come back different. Later, Samuel returned to bring back some final documents. We sat on the porch, and he told me that he planned to leave town again, now in peace, knowing that his story was clean. I felt a soft tightness in my chest, a mixture of gratitude and farewell. He thanked me for fighting, even though he didn't know who he was. I thanked him for showing up, even after so many years. We stood there in silence, watching the trees sway in the wind. Sometimes someone's presence says more than any conversation. When he left, the house was silent again, but a good silence, one of those who embrace. I walked through the rooms, running my hand over the walls, as if remembering each battle won. There were marks of the past there, of course, things I could never erase. But now each mark was also a reminder of the strength I discovered in myself, and that gave me a new meaning to exist in that place. I decided to do something symbolic. I took a bucket, a cloth, and started cleaning the whole house. It wasn't just physical cleansing, it was a ritual, almost a purification. Every corner I cleaned gave me the feeling that I was rebuilding something inside me as well. I removed some old photos from the walls and kept them in a box. Not to throw them away, but to reorganize my life in the right way, looking to the future, not to what has been distorted by the past. When dusk came, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the sky changing color. Loneliness no longer weighed on him. She accompanied me with an unexpected lightness, almost like an old friend. Justice did not give me back my daughter. He didn't give me back my husband. It did not erase the pain. But it gave back something I never imagined recovering. My dignity, my existence, my voice. I knew that the future would still hold challenges. Maybe Helena would disappear for months. Maybe we would never have the relationship I once dreamed of. Maybe the scars would never go away. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that I could go on living without fear, with courage, with force, with the certainty that I survived the worst, and was reborn more whole than I ever was. And as the sky slowly darkened, I had a strange, almost prophetic feeling. The will mentioned a person who had not yet appeared, someone who, in some way, was part of that story. A loose thread from the past, waiting to be pulled. I smiled slightly. Maybe one day, fate would bring this person to me. And if that happened, I'd be ready. Because now, I was Irene. Not the betrayed woman. Not the stolen woman. Not the forgotten woman. I was Irene, and ultimately my own. Now I want to know from you, what would you do in Donna Irene's place? Do you think your daughter deserves a second chance, or has she crossed all boundaries? Comment below, because your opinion enriches this community a lot. And if you want more strong stories like this, leave your comment asking for the next topic.